A 63-year-old fisherman from St. Mary's, Georgia, was out before dawn when his line snagged something heavy, something that refused to move no matter how hard he pulled. Locals say the St. Mary's River keeps secrets beneath its slow, murky surface, but what this man hooked that morning was different. It wasn't debris, and it wasn't a tree stump. When the authorities finally arrived and managed to see what was at the other end, they turned pale and stepped back, whispering to each other as if afraid the river itself might hear them. And what they found inside that heavy bag would change how the entire town saw the water that had fed them for generations. Would you have dared to pull this in, alone, with the mist rolling across the water? Let us know what you think, and if you love real mystery stories, subscribe to hear what happened next. Raymond Keller was a fisherman of the old kind, the kind that woke before the birds and listened to the hush of the river before his boots even touched the damp wood of the dock. At 63, with hands rough as driftwood and eyes the color of early morning fog, he knew the bends of the St. Mary's River as if they were lines etched across his palms. It was the sort of place where tides whispered secrets, where alligators slid through grass so quietly you only saw the ripple, and where, if you listened carefully, you could hear the river breathing. That Tuesday in October began like any other for Raymond. He parked his rusty blue truck under the leaning oak by the launch, packed a thermos of black coffee, and slid his John boat into the water with practiced ease. The morning was cool, the mist rising in thin sheets across the current, a promise of another day chasing catfish and stripers. Nothing more. For a man like Raymond, the river was not a place of leisure but a steady companion, sometimes generous, sometimes cruel, but always there. He made his way upstream, past the cypress knees jutting like dark, wet fingers from the shallows, to a quiet bend where the water deepened and the air smelled of wet mud and decaying leaves. It was a good spot, a place where he had pulled in 50-pound catfish before, where the water moved just slow enough to let the bait settle but fast enough to keep it alive. The world was still waking up when he dropped anchor and cast his first line, watching the ripples vanish into the mist. Hours passed with the quiet rhythm only fishermen understand. Cast, sip coffee, reel, adjust the line, watch the water. He caught 2 decent-sized channel cats and a fat bluegill, enough for a fried dinner with hush puppies that night. Nothing unusual, nothing to hint at what lay beneath the water, waiting for him. It was when the sun finally burned through the fog, painting the surface in gold, that Raymond's line went taut in a way he didn't like. It wasn't the slow fighting pull of a catfish or the sharp tug of a gar. It was heavy, dead weight, a resistance that felt anchored in the mud, unmoving, yet somehow shifting just enough to keep him from dismissing it as a snagged branch. Raymond leaned back, bracing his boots against the boat's edge as he tried to reel it in, the rod bending dangerously under the strain. At first, he cursed under his breath, thinking it was a waterlogged log or a rusted shopping cart. St. Mary's had its share of junk buried beneath its calm exterior. But then he felt a shudder through the line, a slow give, as if whatever it was had adjusted itself in the mud. He glanced around, half expecting to see another boat nearby, but he was alone. The world was silent except for the soft slap of water against the hull and the occasional call of a distant heron. He took a deep breath, shifted his grip, and began to reel, inch by inch, the line tightening, cutting into his hands even through his gloves. Minutes stretched into a quiet battle, the kind only a man alone on the river could understand. Every crank of the reel was met with the stubborn resistance of something that should not move but somehow did. Sweat dripped down his neck and his shoulders ached, but Raymond was nothing if not stubborn. He had pulled engines from the river before, tangled ropes, even an old safe once that had been empty and rusted shut. But this felt different. It was heavy, yes, but there was a shape to it, an unnatural drag that made the water swirl strangely around the boat. As it drew closer, the surface began to darken, a shadow forming just beneath, refusing to reveal itself until it was almost within reach. The smell hit him first, a sour metallic tang that rose from the water in thin, invisible waves, making him pull back for a breath. Raymond adjusted his footing and leaned over, peering into the water. The sun had climbed higher now, cutting through the ripples to reveal something dark and shapeless, wrapped in what looked like a tarp or a heavy blackened bag, bloated and slick with algae. His heart kicked hard in his chest, an instinctual warning that what he was about to bring up was not something meant to be disturbed, but something in him, something deep and insistent. told him he had to see it through. It was the river's rule. If you hook something, you bring it in. That was how he was raised, and that was how he had lived, with a quiet respect for the water that gave him his living. You don't leave a line in the water. You don't ignore a pull, no matter how heavy, no matter how wrong it feels. He grabbed the gaff hook from the side of the boat, slid it into the water, and snagged the edge of the bag, lifting it carefully as water poured from the folds, thick and dark, leaving behind a trail of oily circles on the surface. It was heavy, too heavy for something like this, and as it broke the surface, it made a sucking sound that turned his stomach. It took him nearly 10 minutes to haul it over the edge, and when it finally landed on the floor of the boat with a wet thud, the boat rocked dangerously, sending small waves lapping against the reeds at the river's edge. He stood there, breathing hard, staring at the black shape in front of him, water pooling around it, carrying with it that metallic stench, thicker now, almost sweet in a way that made him swallow hard. The bag was tied at the top with thick green rope, frayed but holding. Patches of the material were torn, revealing hints of something dark beneath, but not enough to see what was inside. He could feel the weight of it through the floor of the boat, pressing down like a physical presence, a reminder that whatever was inside did not want to be moved. Raymond sat back on the bench, wiping sweat from his brow, the morning's calm replaced by a tightness in his chest he couldn't shake. The river was quiet again, as if waiting, as if watching him. He could hear the distant hum of a boat engine somewhere downstream. But here, in this bend of the river, it was just him and the bag, and the decision that now sat between them like a third presence in the boat. He knew he couldn't just throw it back. It was too late for that. He had pulled it up, and now it was his to deal with. But as he reached forward, his fingers brushing against the wet, slippery material, he felt a hesitation that was foreign to him. Raymond had faced storms on this river, had pulled nets in the middle of lightning strikes, had found bodies of animals and even a drowned man once. But this felt different. There was something about the way the bag sat there, the way it seemed to absorb the light, the way the water dripped from it in thick, slow drops, that made him feel like he had crossed an invisible line. He felt it in the back of his mind, an itch he couldn't scratch, a whisper of warning that told him some things were meant to stay beneath the water. But he had to know. He reached for his knife, the one he used to gut fish, the blade worn but sharp. The river breeze picked up, rustling the reeds, as if the world was holding its breath. Raymond slid the blade under the rope, sawing carefully, the fibers snapping one by one, each sound too loud in the morning air. When the rope finally gave way, the knot loosened, the top of the bag falling open slightly, revealing a glimpse of dark fabric inside, something that looked like clothing, but was soaked through, clinging to something solid beneath. Raymond's hand trembled, just slightly, as he pulled the opening wider, the smell hitting him like a physical blow, making him gag and turn his head for a moment, the taste of iron on the back of his tongue. He forced himself to look back, forcing air into his lungs as he peeled the fabric back just enough to see what lay inside. And there, beneath the layers of soaked cloth and algae, he saw something pale, something shaped in a way that no piece of driftwood or old debris could ever be. Fingers, thin and white, curled in a way that told him immediately, undeniably, that this was no object, no old piece of trash the river had swallowed. This was a hand. He pulled back so fast he nearly fell from the boat, catching himself on the side, his breath ragged, the boat rocking wildly beneath him. His mind raced, flashes of stories he had heard over the years about missing people, about arguments on the docks, about cars abandoned near the river at night. The river kept its secrets, but now, one of those secrets was sitting in his boat, dripping river water onto the aluminum floor. Raymond sat there, staring at the bag, at the hand, unable to look away. The river moved quietly around him, the morning sun now fully above the trees, lighting up the water in a way that felt wrong, too bright, too alive for what he had just uncovered. He reached for his radio, hands shaking, his voice rough as he called out for the sheriff, for anyone, telling them they needed to come, that he had found something in the river, something they would need to see for themselves. And as he waited, the boat drifting slowly in the current, the bag lay there, silent, the hand resting just at the opening, pale and still, as if reaching for something the river had promised long ago. Raymond's call crackled across the old radio, the words stumbling from his mouth in a rough whisper as he tried to keep his eyes on the bag, on the pale hand that now lay in the open, catching the light with a soft, unnatural sheen. The river seemed to hush around him as if listening, the wind dying down so the only sound was the gentle slap of water against the hull and the faint, distant whine of insects waking in the heat. "Sheriff, you need to come out here," he repeated, gripping the microphone so tightly his knuckles went white. "You need to see this. I think it's a body." He sat back, the radio silent for a moment before a voice came through, low and calm, telling him to stay where he was, asking for his location, promising help was on the way. But those words felt empty in the heavy, humid air of the river, with the bag sitting there, silent and accusing, reminding him that he was alone with something that should never have seen the light. Minutes felt like hours as Raymond waited, the sun climbing higher, the air growing thick, the smell from the bag crawling over the boat like an unwelcome fog. He tried to look away, tried to find comfort in the familiar shapes of the riverbank, the sway of the Spanish moss in the breeze, the distant cry of a bird, but his eyes always returned to the hand, to the limp fingers that seemed to curl slightly each time the boat rocked. He thought of all the stories he had heard over the years, of people who had gone missing, of arguments that ended badly, of debts that were never paid. He thought of the river as a quiet graveyard, a place that took what it was given and kept it hidden, cold and dark, beneath its shifting surface. And he wondered, not for the first time, who this person was, what had brought them to this end, wrapped in a bag and left to sink beneath the mud and the weeds. A boat engine echoed in the distance, growing louder, and he turned to see the sheriff's department skiff coming around the bend, the blue light on the console flashing in the daylight, a quiet warning that something was wrong. Two men were in the boat, Sheriff Tom McAllister and Deputy Clay Rowe, both of them with faces set in hard lines, their eyes hidden behind dark glasses that reflected the water as they approached. Raymond raised a hand, pointing to the bag without speaking, his throat dry, the words caught somewhere between fear and the strange, heavy responsibility that now weighed on him. The sheriff pulled alongside, tying off to Raymond's boat with practiced ease, the gentle bump of fiberglass against aluminum sounding too loud in the quiet morning. "What do we have, Ray?" the sheriff asked, his voice low, careful, as he stepped aboard Raymond's boat, his boots creaking on the wet floor. Raymond swallowed, gesturing again to the bag. "Found it on the bottom, hooked my line, thought it was trash. It's not trash." The sheriff knelt beside the bag, pulling on a pair of latex gloves before carefully peeling back the flap that Raymond had opened. He paused, the air between them thick, before letting out a slow breath that sounded like a sigh, but one that carried the weight of experience, of too many long nights and too many calls like this one. "God Almighty," the sheriff muttered, turning his head slightly before looking back, leaning in to examine the hand, the wrist, the pale skin that told its own story of time spent beneath the water. Deputy Clay stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he looked down, one hand resting on the butt of his radio as if ready to call in what they had found. But he didn't speak, didn't move, just stared, the silence between them saying everything. They worked together in the small, swaying boat, carefully unwrapping the bag enough to confirm what they needed to, the sound of the tarp sliding against itself loud and harsh. The smell grew stronger, forcing them to breathe through their mouths, eyes watering slightly as they uncovered the form inside. The body curled in on itself, clothed in what looked like jeans and a flannel shirt, the fabric darkened and heavy with water. Raymond looked away, staring at the water, at the reflection of the clouds drifting by, at the life that continued around them as if nothing had happened. But in that moment he felt the weight of the river's secrets pressing down on him, the realization that what he had pulled from the water was not just a body, but a story, one that someone, somewhere, would want to know. The sheriff stood, pulling the flap of the bag back over the body, his face pale beneath the brim of his hat. "We're going to need forensics out here," he said quietly to Clay, who nodded, stepping back to call in on his radio, his voice low but urgent as he relayed the coordinates and the situation. Raymond sat down, suddenly feeling the ache in his arms, the exhaustion from the fight with the river, from the moment he had felt that weight on his line and decided to pull it in, to face whatever was at the other end. He looked up at the sheriff, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. "Do you think it was foul play?" The sheriff glanced at him, his eyes unreadable behind the glasses, before looking back at the river. "Hard to say, Ray, but it sure doesn't look like an accident." They sat in silence for a moment, the boats drifting slightly with the current, the reeds rustling softly as the wind picked up again. The deputy finished his call, looking over with a nod, confirming that the forensics team was on the way, that the coroner would meet them at the dock. Raymond looked at the bag, at the shape inside, and felt a strange mix of fear and sorrow, of curiosity and regret. Who were they? How long had they been down there waiting to be found, waiting for someone to care enough to pull them back into the world of the living, if only for a moment, if only to give them a name again? The sheriff placed a hand on Raymond's shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You did the right thing, Ray. Might have just given this person a chance to go home." Raymond nodded, but the words felt heavy, the weight of them sinking into the quiet of the river. He wasn't sure what was worse, finding something like this, or knowing that it had been there, hidden, while the world went on around it, blind to the truth just beneath the surface. The boat slowly turned back toward the dock, the body secured, the river parting around them as they moved, the weight of the discovery pressing down on everyone aboard. Raymond didn't speak as he steered, his eyes scanning the water, the banks, the trees, seeing everything differently now, as if the river itself had shifted, had revealed a part of itself that could never be unseen. And as they approached the dock, the sheriff's boat moving ahead to clear a space for the coroner's van, Raymond felt a question rising in his mind, a doubt that refused to leave, that pressed against the back of his thoughts with every slow churn of the motor. How many more were down there? How many more secrets did the river keep, waiting for the right tug on a line, for the right moment when the water would let go, revealing what it had hidden for so long? And would you, sitting there watching this, have pulled it in? Would you have had the courage to see it through, to bring it into the light, to face what the river chose to give back? Let us know in the comments what you would have done if you were in Raymond's place, alone on that quiet river when the line went heavy. Would you have pulled it in, or would you have let it go, letting the river keep its secret? We want to hear what you think, and if you're drawn to real stories like this, stories that remind us of how thin the line is between the everyday and the extraordinary, hit the like button and subscribe. We share these stories every week, stories of the river, of the missing, of the mysteries that refuse to stay buried, waiting for someone brave enough to look. Because one day, it might be your line that goes heavy, and you'll have to decide if you're ready to pull it in. The dock was quiet when they arrived, the boards creaking under the weight of the sheriff and the deputy as they stepped off the boat, signaling Raymond to hold back while they secured the area. A few curious onlookers had gathered by the boat launch, people who had come to fish, to kayak, to take in the morning breeze off the St. Mary's River, their chatter falling silent as they saw the black bag being carefully lifted from the boat. Raymond stayed seated, gripping the gunwale, watching as the coroner's van pulled in, the doors swinging open with a hollow thud that seemed to echo in the humid air. A woman stepped out, small in stature but moving with practiced certainty, her hair tied back in a tight bun, her face calm as she pulled on gloves and approached the scene. "Morning, Sheriff," she said, nodding to McAllister. "What do we have?" "Body pulled from the river, wrapped in a tarp, possibly foul play. Found by Ray here," the sheriff replied, jerking a thumb in Raymond's direction without taking his eyes off the bag. The coroner, Dr. Elise Franklin, glanced at Raymond briefly, offering a nod of quiet respect before crouching near the bag as the deputy unwrapped it carefully, the river water dripping onto the dock, forming dark stains on the weathered boards. The smell rose again, sharp and cloying, making a few of the onlookers step back, hands over their mouths, eyes wide. Elise leaned in, her gloved hands moving with clinical precision as she examined the exposed hand, the wrist, the visible parts of the clothing, taking mental notes before reaching for her phone to take a series of photos. Each click of the shutter felt loud, a record of the moment, freezing the quiet horror in a sequence of images that would become evidence, something official. "Male, adult," she said quietly, shifting the tarp to expose more of the body, revealing the flannel shirt, the soaked jeans, the pale skin beneath. Decomposition consistent with extended water exposure, but not so far gone that we can't identify him. We'll need to check dental records, fingerprints if possible. Raymond watched, feeling a strange numbness spreading through him, as if the moment was too heavy to process all at once. The sheriff stood beside the coroner, arms crossed, jaw tight, his eyes never leaving the body as she worked, as if trying to piece together the story before the evidence could be collected. before the forensics reports could confirm what his instincts already suspected. "Doc, you think this was an accident?" the sheriff asked, his voice low, a question spoken more to himself than to her. Elise paused, pulling back the edge of the shirt to reveal the skin beneath, the marks that ran along the upper arms, faint but unmistakable in the light. Her eyes narrowed as she traced the lines with her gloved finger, not touching but observing, the silence deepening around them. "No," she said finally, standing and pulling off her gloves, dropping them into a biohazard bag with a soft crinkle. "Those are ligature marks. He was tied up before he went into the water." The words hung in the air, sinking into the boards, into the minds of everyone within earshot, turning a quiet recovery into something darker, something that whispered of violence, of a crime hidden beneath the surface of the river. The sheriff exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the early morning air despite the humidity, a small cloud that vanished as quickly as it appeared. He nodded once, turning to Deputy Clay. "We need to call in CID. Get the crime scene team here now." Clay stepped back, speaking rapidly into his radio, his eyes scanning the small crowd that had begun to gather, whispering among themselves, their curiosity tempered by the realization that what they were witnessing was not just a tragic accident, but the unraveling of a secret the river had tried to keep. Raymond felt their eyes on him, felt the weight of their curiosity pressing down, but he kept his gaze on the dock, on the water, on the boat that still rocked gently against the pilings as if nothing had happened. He felt the exhaustion in his bones, the deep ache of a man who had pulled something from the water that should have remained hidden and now could never be unseen. He didn't regret it, but the knowledge of what he had uncovered settled into him like a cold stone, a reminder that sometimes the river gave back things that demanded answers, things that pulled you into a story you never asked to be part of. The crime scene team arrived in unmarked trucks, their equipment cases clicking open, cameras flashing, latex gloves snapping on, evidence markers placed around the dock, around the bag, around the small droplets of water that led from the boat to the tarp. They moved with quiet efficiency, collecting what needed to be collected, taking samples, documenting every angle, every shadow, every stain. The sheriff stepped aside, speaking quietly with the lead investigator, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a lined face that spoke of long years spent looking into the darkness people tried to hide. His name was Detective Sam Coleridge, and he had a way of listening that made people feel seen, even when they didn't want to be. He approached Raymond, extending a gloved hand, his eyes steady. "Raymond Keller, I'm Detective Coleridge. First, thank you for calling this in. I know it's not easy." Raymond shook his hand, the glove cold against his skin. Wasn't going to leave it there. Coleridge nodded, looking out at the river, the sunlight dancing on the ripples as if nothing had changed. "You did the right thing. Can you walk me through exactly what happened, from the moment you felt the line catch?" Raymond exhaled, telling the story again, the words coming slower now, each detail settling like sediment in the air between them. The tug on the line, the weight, the slow, heavy pull, the moment he saw the bag, the smell, the decision to pull it into the boat, the shock of seeing the hand, the call to the sheriff. Coleridge listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, his eyes flicking to the bag, to the boat, to the river, as if piecing together a puzzle only he could see. When Raymond finished, the detective was silent for a moment before speaking. "Ray, you didn't see anyone else on the river this morning? No other boats? No one acting strange near the launch?" Raymond shook his head. "Just me. Just the river." The detective's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of thought crossing his face before he nodded again. "All right. We'll need to take your boat for evidence processing. Check for any trace materials. You can pick it up when we're done, but I promise we'll take care of it." Raymond nodded, swallowing hard, feeling the river's quiet call in the back of his mind, the empty space where the boat would usually be, the loss of his morning routine, replaced now by something darker, something that would leave a stain he couldn't wash away. The forensics team lifted the bag, placing it carefully into a body bag, zipping it closed with a soft final sound that seemed to echo across the dock. They lifted it into the van, closing the doors, the locks clicking shut, the promise of answers now resting with the county coroner, with the lab, with the slow, methodical process of uncovering a truth that the river had tried to keep hidden. The crowd began to disperse, the whispers fading, leaving behind only the soft sounds of the river, the rustle of the wind, the gentle creak of the dock as Raymond stood there, feeling the weight of the morning pressing down on him. The sheriff stepped over, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You need a ride home, Ray?" Raymond shook his head. "I'll walk. Need to clear my head." The sheriff nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You call me if you remember anything else." "And Ray?" "Thank you." Raymond nodded, turning away, his boots thudding softly on the dock as he began the slow walk back toward the road, past the trucks, past the small crowd that avoided his eyes, past the water that lapped quietly at the pilings as if nothing had happened. As he walked, he couldn't help but look back, just once, at the river, at the place where he had felt that heavy tug, where he had fought to pull the bag from the water, where he had crossed that invisible line between the ordinary and the extraordinary, between the living and the dead. And as the breeze shifted, carrying the scent of the river and the promise of rain on the horizon, Raymond wondered again, how many more were down there? How many more secrets did the river keep, waiting for the right moment, the right person, to bring them back into the light? If you're still here, watching, I want to know. If you had felt that heavy pull on your line, alone on the river, would you have pulled it in? Or would you have let the river keep its secret? Comment below and let us know what you think happened to the man in the bag. Who was he? Why was he there? If these stories pull you in the way the river pulls at your line, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. We bring you stories like this every week. Stories that remind us how quickly an ordinary morning can turn into something you'll never forget. Because the river doesn't give up its secrets easily, but sometimes it chooses you to pull them out. The rain came that evening, drifting in over St. Mary's like a gray curtain, tapping softly on Raymond's tin roof as he sat in his kitchen, the kettle hissing on the stove. He couldn't stop seeing the hand, pale against the dark tarp, every time he closed his eyes. He couldn't stop hearing the river, the soft slap of water against the hull, the weight of the moment when the bag broke the surface, dripping and heavy with its hidden truth. He didn't sleep that night, and when dawn came, he found himself at the dock, staring out over the river, waiting, though he didn't know what he was waiting for. The sheriff's truck pulled in just after sunrise, the gravel crunching beneath the tires as Sheriff McAllister stepped out, his hat pulled low against the drizzle. "Ray," the sheriff called, waving him over. "Got something you need to hear." They sat in the cab of the truck, the heater humming softly, the windows fogged from the damp air. The sheriff took a deep breath, adjusting the file in his hands before opening it, the papers inside rustling like dry leaves. They ran prints, dental, even checked missing persons databases, the sheriff said, tapping the file with one finger. Took some time, but they got a hit. His name was David Mercer, 42, lived 2 towns over in Kingsland. Reported missing 3 months ago by his sister. Raymond frowned, the name unfamiliar, but the weight of it settled over him, giving a face to the hand that had reached out from the river, a name to the pale fingers that had curled as if asking for help. "How'd he end up here?" Raymond asked, his voice rough from disuse. The sheriff shook his head slowly. "That's the part that doesn't add up. According to his sister, David didn't have any enemies, no debts, no reason for anyone to want him gone. He worked at a boat repair shop, kept to himself mostly. One night, he didn't come home. His truck was found abandoned near a boat launch, but not here, over in Crooked River." Raymond felt a chill creep down his spine, the pieces not fitting, the questions piling up like driftwood in the current. "So how'd he get here?" "That's what we're trying to find out," the sheriff said, closing the file and leaning back, his eyes tired. "Coroner's report shows ligature marks on his wrists and ankles. He was tied up before he died. Water in his lungs, so he was alive when he went in. But here's the part that's strange." He paused, leaning forward, lowering his voice. "Police found old bruising on his torso, consistent with blunt force trauma. He'd been beaten, but it was healing. Weeks old. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing, Ray. Someone wanted him gone, and they took their time doing it." Raymond stared out the window, the river stretching out in the distance, the mist rising off the surface like a living thing. "Why dump him here?" he asked quietly. The sheriff didn't answer immediately, his eyes following Raymond's gaze toward the water. "Maybe they thought the river would keep the secret," he said finally. "Maybe it was just convenient. Or maybe whoever did this knew this spot well enough to believe no one would ever find him." Raymond's jaw tightened, the memory of the heavy pull on the line returning with a sharp clarity. "But I did," he whispered. "Yes," the sheriff said, looking at him, his eyes steady. "You did." Days passed, and the investigation widened. Detectives spoke to David's family, his co-workers, his few friends. They learned that David had been quiet, that he liked fishing on weekends, that he spent most of his time working on old boat motors and volunteering at a local marina. No one could think of a reason why someone would hurt him, let alone kill him and sink him in the river. The forensics team found trace evidence on the tarp, bits of vegetation not native to the St. Mary's River, but matching the brackish marshes near Crooked River. They found paint flakes, red, consistent with the inside of a certain type of fishing boat. They found fragments of rope fibers embedded in the knots, matching marine rope commonly used in crab traps. Detective Coleridge stood in the sheriff's office, pinning photos and maps to a corkboard, the lines connecting locations like a spider's web across the Georgia coast. Crooked River, Kingsland, St. Mary's, the marshes, the tides, the currents. The current, they realized, could not have carried the bag from Crooked River to St. Mary's in the condition it was found. Someone had moved it at some point and dropped it into the river where Raymond had found it. Someone had wanted it found, or had panicked and dumped it, thinking the river would swallow it again. They pulled surveillance footage from nearby docks, marinas, and gas stations, looking for David's truck, looking for any sign of movement. And they found it. Grainy footage from a gas station near Crooked River, showing David's truck pulling in late at night, a figure stepping out, taller than David, heavier, wearing a dark hoodie, moving quickly, fueling up, driving off. The truck was found the next morning, abandoned near the boat launch. Keys still in the ignition, doors unlocked, as if someone wanted it found. The investigation revealed that David had been working on a boat in the weeks before his disappearance, an old Boston whaler owned by a man named Carl Hinton, a crabber with a reputation for cutting corners and ignoring regulations. Neighbors reported arguments between David and Carl, shouting matches over payments, accusations about missing equipment, but no one took it seriously at the time. When the detectives questioned Carl, he denied everything, claiming he hadn't seen David in weeks, that he'd paid him what he was owed, that he didn't know what happened to him. But when they searched Carl's property, they found rope matching the fibers found on the bag, and a tarp with a cut edge matching the material used to wrap David's body. They arrested Carl Hinton 3 weeks after Raymond pulled the bag from the river, charging him with murder, tampering with evidence, and unlawful disposal of a body. The trial would take months, but the evidence was building, piece by piece. The story of what happened to David Mercer, coming together like a puzzle dredged up from the dark water. But even with the arrest, even with the charges, there were questions that wouldn't go away. Why had Carl kept David alive for days before killing him? What was the argument really about? And why dump him in a spot so specific that a fisherman like Raymond would be the one to find him? Theories floated around town like leaves on the current. Some said it was over stolen crab pots. Others whispered that David had found something on Carl's boat. Drugs, stolen equipment, something worth killing for. Others believed it was a fight that got out of hand, a debt unpaid, a grudge that turned violent. But no one really knew. The river had given up one secret, but it held the rest close, the way it always did, whispering in the reeds, shifting in the currents, reminding everyone who lived near it that it would always keep some truths buried beneath the mud. Raymond stood at the dock a week after the arrest, the morning mist cool on his face, the water calm, reflecting the sunrise in soft ripples. His boat had been returned, cleaned and checked, but he hadn't taken it out yet. He just stood there, staring at the spot where he had felt the tug on his line, the weight that had changed everything. A young boy walked up, a fishing rod in hand, looking at Raymond with wide eyes. "Is it true you found a dead body?" he asked, the innocence in his voice cutting through the morning quiet. Raymond looked down, seeing himself in the boy's hopeful, curious face, and nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's true." "Were you scared?" the boy asked, shifting from foot to foot, gripping his rod tightly. Raymond thought for a moment, the memory of the moment washing over him again. "A little," he admitted. "But sometimes you have to do what's right, even when you're scared." The boy nodded, considering this, before turning and walking down the dock, casting his line into the water, the ripples spreading out like small promises across the surface. Raymond watched him for a moment before turning back to the river, the question that had haunted him since that morning rising again in his mind. How many more are down there? waiting for someone to find them. And would you, watching this now, have pulled that heavy bag in if it were your line, your boat, your morning on the water? Would you have had the courage to reel it in and face what the river was hiding? Let us know in the comments what you think was really behind this discovery. Was it a debt, a secret, or something darker that no one has uncovered yet? Hit the like button if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, and subscribe if you want to hear the next chapter when the river decides to speak again. Because the river always speaks. You just have to be ready to listen. The trial of Carl Hinton became the talk of Camden County, filling newspapers and local Facebook groups with speculation and theories that flickered like campfire shadows. Testimonies painted a portrait of a man driven by desperation and anger, debts piling up, traps stolen in the dead of night, whispers of side deals and hidden packages moving up and down the Georgia coast under cover of darkness. Some said David Mercer had discovered one of those packages hidden in the false bottom of the boat Carl had asked him to repair. Others claimed David was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, witnessing something Carl couldn't allow him to live with. The prosecution argued that Carl had kept David alive for days, trying to force him to reveal who else knew about what he found, before finally deciding it was safer to silence him and let the river bury the evidence. But the defense fought back, insisting it was an accident, a drunken fight that ended badly, that Carl had panicked, wrapping David's body and dumping it into the river without realizing the tide would turn against him. Raymond sat quietly at the back of the courtroom each day, hands folded on his knees, listening to the lawyers argue, watching the evidence he had pulled from the river laid out under harsh fluorescent lights. Every photograph and rope fragment, every knot and water-stained scrap of tarp, a reminder of the moment his line had gone heavy. He watched David's sister, her face drawn, her eyes tired but determined, clutching a small photograph of David, the edges worn from years of being carried in her wallet. He watched Carl's family, the fear and confusion on their faces as they tried to reconcile the man they knew with the man on trial. And he watched the jurors, their faces shifting as each piece of evidence was laid before them, the weight of the river's secret now theirs to carry. When the verdict came, it was swift, guilty on all counts. The judge's gavel fell, echoing through the room like the sound of a boat knocking against a dock in the dark. Raymond stepped outside, the courthouse doors closing behind him, the crisp fall air filling his lungs as he looked up at the sky, the clouds moving slowly, the light shifting across the town. It was done, but the river remained, unchanged, the current still moving, carrying with it the knowledge that there were stories beneath its surface waiting for the right moment, the right line, the right hand to pull them free. Weeks later, Raymond found himself back on the river at dawn, the mist rolling low across the water, the sky streaked with pale pink as the sun began to climb. His boat rocked gently beneath him as he cast his line, watching the ripples spread out, the quiet swallowing the world around him. Every creak of the boat, every small splash, every tug on the line now carried with it a question he couldn't shake. What else was down there? Was it an old anchor lost to time, a catfish heavy with the promise of a meal, or was it something else, something the river had kept hidden, waiting for someone to care enough, or to be brave enough, to pull it back into the light? The river was like that, giving back what it chose, when it chose, and taking what it wanted in return. Some mornings it was generous, offering up fish and calm waters. Other mornings it was cruel, reminding those who worked its bends and channels that it was a keeper of secrets, an unmarked graveyard that could whisper your name if you weren't careful. Raymond reeled in his line, checking the bait, the rhythm familiar, the motion comforting. But every time the line went heavy, even just for a moment, he felt his breath catch, felt his mind drift back to that morning, to the smell of the tarp, to the sight of the pale hand reaching out, asking for help, asking to be remembered. People in town treated Raymond differently now. Some offered a nod of respect when they passed him at the dock or in the hardware store. Others avoided his eyes, as if afraid the river's darkness might follow them home if they acknowledged the man who had disturbed its secrets. But most simply didn't know what to say, how to speak about something so raw, so real, so close to the quiet lives they led. Raymond didn't mind. He didn't need their words. He had the river, and the river had him, bound together by the line that had gone heavy that morning, a silent agreement between the water and the man who fished its depths. He cast again, the lure spinning through the air before landing with a soft plunk, sinking into the dark water, the ripples spreading out like rings of memory, like echoes of a story that refused to end. And as the sun rose higher, cutting through the mist, Raymond sat quietly in his boat, waiting, listening, knowing that the river would speak again, and when it did, he would be there, ready to listen, ready to pull, ready to bring back whatever it chose to give, because the river always gives back, eventually. And sometimes what it gives back is a story that changes everything. Now I have a question for you, the one still here, watching, feeling the weight of this story the way Raymond felt the weight on his line that morning. If you were out on the water, alone, with the mist curling around your boat and the world silent except for the soft breath of the river, and you felt your line go heavy, would you pull it in? Or would you let the river keep its secret, pretending you never felt that tug at all? Comment below and share your thoughts. What do you believe was really behind David's death? Was it truly about a stolen trap? Or was there something deeper, something darker beneath the surface? Something the river has yet to fully reveal. And if you felt this story pull at you the way the river pulled at Raymond, don't forget to like this video so more people can discover stories that the river tries to hide. Subscribe if you want to join us each week as we bring you true stories of mystery, disappearance, and the thin line between the everyday and the unexplainable. And most importantly, turn on notifications so you don't miss the next time the river decides to give back what it has taken. Because the river is always waiting, and so are we.